Okay, so after going through and reworking my schedule, trying to get it all sorted out, trying to get everything organized, God, man, the biggest problem that I have is there's so many things I want to cover and there's just not enough days to cover them. That's the biggest problem. Otherwise, I'd be doing like different videos every single day and it gets confusing and crazy. But Green Lantern, and like really because of Jeff Johns' run, because of how big it is, it's going to be one of those things that we just kind of do where we have room to put it. And we'll just do it on our classic DC day. And then, once like Justice League, when the movie comes out, we'll actually put Green Lantern on hold, cover New 52 Justice League, and then come back to Green Lantern again. But what this story does, really this sort of Ion story, is in a lot of ways it's self-contained. I mean, really, it's not technically part of the greater Green Lantern story, but it does give us some pretty important things with regards to Kyle Rayner and really kind of elevates him above all the other Green Lanterns, making him somebody of a pretty high level of significance in relation to every other Green Lantern ever, in the sense that he holds a special place. Now, this will also become important once we get to the idea of Kyle Rayner becoming the White Lantern and all those different kinds of things. So again, it's really kind of an important bit here, but what this does is it actually deals initially with the idea of Kyle Rayner losing his mind, Kyle Rayner going crazy, and actually attacking a few of the other Green Lanterns. Now, the reason why this matters is, remember, we have our video where we talk about like the power of the Starheart. And again, you'll find that down in the description, but it basically means that at this moment right now, Kyle Rayner wields two sources of power. He wields the Starheart, which is basically all this magical energy from another universe, as well as the traditional Green Lantern powers that are given to him by virtue of a Green Lantern ring. And so the cool thing about this is that while he doesn't necessarily wield a ring per se, he does have this insane source of energy about him. And so again, it makes things pretty interesting in terms of how he functions and in terms of what he does, because he's basically got two sets of powers combined into one. Now, the reason why this happens and what seems to be going on with Kyle Rayner in terms of him being insane is that he'll black out. He'll basically go through these instances where he just sort of lashes out, he'll lose his temper, he'll attack people, and then he'll black out and wake up somewhere else. In this instance, following this attack on these other members of the Green Lanterns, he simply wakes up back at home where he meets up with a guy by the name of Schuler, I think it is, and it's really just him just kind of learning how to be a better artist. Remember, being an artist is part of Kyle Rayner's whole repertoire. Now, the reason why this matters and the reason why this part of the story is being told is because for a lot of people, keep in mind, Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern was their introduction to Green Lantern. And so really like Ron Mars, Jeff Johns, these guys, they could not come along and basically just throw Kyle Rayner in there without giving any explanation of who he is or what he's about. Now, he does make small references to things like his past, relationships, the fact that the history he has with various women have always been pretty much unsuccessful in the sense, but for the most part, they've all died. This really comes by way of the fact of a girl who's basically moved in on the property where, these various artists reside, and she doesn't say anything. She doesn't speak, she doesn't address anybody. And when the question is asked by Kyle Rayner who this girl is, of course, Schuler basically says, look, she doesn't talk. But for him, he thinks back, to his first major girlfriend who was killed by Major Force, I think it was, and then stuffed into a fridge. There's all these different instances in his character's history where his relationships with women just never really work out. They usually all end up dying. But in terms of Kyle Rayner himself and what he means, the first indication of this comes from the Guardians of the Universe, who are basically watching all this unfold. Now, keep in mind, in the Green Lantern landscape, the Guardians are very cloak and dagger. They do not tell the Green Lanterns anything unless they need to know. The Guardians keep a lot of secrets to themselves. Now, this creates some measure of distrust among the Green Lanterns, especially with Hal Jordan, who doesn't view them as necessarily trustworthy, but views them as necessary in the sense that maybe they're holding that information because people don't need to know. But again, it creates kind of a rift between the two groups because there are oftentimes things where the Green Lanterns just want to know what's going on, but the Guardians won't tell them what it is that's happening. This is really significant with regards to Kilowog and a lot of the members who are part of the Green Lantern Corps when these injured members of the Lanterns that were attacked by Kyle Rayner land on Oa. And when the question is asked what happened and they say Kyle Rayner basically lost his mind, he attacked us, we don't know why, the response of the Guardians is no one is to intervene with what's going on with Kyle Rayner. You do not offer him aid and you stay out of his way. You let him be. Now, again, this is kind of crazy because it's basically, these members of the Green Lantern Corps learning that one of their guys is basically kind of going awry and seeming to have some kind of crisis, and laying waste to innocent people out there. But the Guardians are basically saying, you cannot intervene on his behalf. You have to let him go. So again, this is pretty tough. It's really, really hard for any of the members of the Green Lantern Corps to actually do on their own, but ultimately they're made to. And again, we continue to see these experiences of Kyle Rayner blacking out, of Kyle Rayner not knowing what's going on, just kind of waking up in the aftermath of all this destruction and having no idea what's happening. Now, of course, this will be explained and we'll find out what it is that's going on, but while this is taking place, we actually have Kilowog sneaking off a message to a member of the Green Lantern Corps for the purpose of saying, hey, look, Kyle Rayner's basically lost his mind. You have to go out and find him and you have to bring him back. Now, this again also kind of shows us the solace that goes on between the members of the Green Lantern Corps, in the sense that, Salak, who basically speaks on behalf of the Guardians and kind of upholds the laws that they pass, appears to Kilowog, kind of asking him what it is that you were doing, what's going on, and then ultimately says, look, if you hadn't done it, I would have. Now, again, this is cool because it shows us the standing that Kyle Rayner has among the Green Lantern Corps. Remember, going all the way back to Emerald Twilight and so on and so forth, Hal Jordan is always viewed with a slanted eye, even if he's a good guy now, even if he's fighting on behalf of the Green Lanterns, even if he's tried to repent for his actions under the name of Parallax, he's still viewed as someone that can't really be trusted by the Green Lanterns. But Kyle Rayner does not hold that struggle. Kyle Rayner has always been there. He's like the Dick Grayson of the Green Lantern Corps. He's this bright shining light that everybody always trusts. And so because of that, we end up finding out that in the midst of him basically passing out and going through one of his episodes, that Kyle Rayner basically stumbles upon Mogo, the Green Lantern planet. Now again, this is part of the Guardians of the Universe plan, but we don't know it yet. We simply know that Mogo is there. And the cool thing about this is that Kyle Rayner begins going through and having these visions of various people that he's had. Of course, one of the first major relationships that he had, the girl named Alex, it's kind of cool meeting with her because we get to sort of go back and do this tour of Kyle Rayner's life, the women that he's known and the women that he's lost, the failures that he's had over the course of his Green Lantern career. Whether he meets Alex, whether he meets Donna Troy, regardless of what person he runs into, is basically this ongoing concept. Jade, the daughter of Alan Scott, the one who gave Kyle Rayner the power of the Starheart. All these different things come together for this idea of Kyle Rayner having his own doubts that for him, he does not view himself as a worthy Green Lantern. He views himself worthy insofar that the other members of the Green Lantern Corps trust him to a degree. He views himself worthy insofar that he's allowed to wield the ring because he has the willpower to do it if a ring is what he needs to pull off the things that he does. But at the end of the day, he does not see himself as a worthy Green Lantern. He sees himself as a guy who's made too many mistakes. Now, this is cool because what this does is it shows us that the ghost of Parallax still lingers on. The ghost of Hal Jordan losing his mind, wiping out the Green Lantern Corps, Kyle Rayner being the last remaining Green Lantern, it still lingers on. It's still very much a part of who he is and what he's about, and his biggest fear is that he will become Hal Jordan. His biggest fear is that he will become Parallax. Somewhere along the line, all these losses that he's experienced, all these perceived failures that he's gone through will come home to roost. It's really this idea that Hal Jordan had a huge role in the life of Kyle Rayner and the fact that Kyle Rayner's afraid of falling down the same path. Now, the reason why this is so important is because of the fact that the person we find out that Kilowog was talking to is Hal Jordan himself. And so what's basically been happening is Hal Jordan has been following this trail of destruction by Kyle Rayner and basically tracing him back to his own particular location. Now, of course, this again brings us back to Kyle Rayner back on the planet of Mogo. And after facing off against all these threats that he's had, facing off against Major Force, for example, the guy who was responsible for the death of Alex, the guy who was responsible for the death of Jade, for these women who were important in the life of Kyle Rayner, facing against Major Force is effectively Kyle Rayner facing off against all the major issues and all the struggles that he has. Now, again, Major Force is not actually here. Donna Troy is not actually here. Alex is not actually here. They are constructs manifested by Mogo himself, but it's designed to force Kyle Rayner to face himself. He's basically facing who he is, everything that he's ever done, every mistake he's ever made, and every fear he ever has. The reason why this is important is because this covers the emotional spectrum. I mean, think about it. Fear, rage, hope, death, life. All these things represent the emotional spectrum. Every single one, he's basically proving himself to be a master of. He's overcoming his fear. He's overcoming the fact that sometimes people die and there's nothing you can do to stop them. He's overcoming the idea that life has its own pattern. It has its own form. People are born and they die. He's facing his rage and his anger with Major Force. This is the first step that Kyle Rayner takes to becoming the White Lantern. So that's why this is so important. And so with Kyle Rayner having a Green Lantern ring, overcoming all these things allows him to effectively cast the ring aside and be a power source unto himself. And that's really the test that the Guardians of the Universe were forcing him to undergo. Now, of course, the answer still has to be asked. Why were these blackouts taking place? Why was Kyle Rayner effectively losing his mind? Well, of course, what ends up happening here is we actually find out there's two Kyle Rayners running around here. There's the Kyle Rayner on the planet of Mogo, and there's a Kyle Rayner who's running around tearing things up and ripping things apart. Now, of course, Hal Jordan catches up to the evil Kyle Rayner, so to speak. And as the two of them end up doing battle with one another, what we end up finding out is the real Kyle Rayner actually shows up. And that's the crazy scenario here, because while Hal Jordan is talking to this evil Kyle Rayner almost seems to be himself. He's talking about the terrible things that he's done, trying to make up remorse, trying to do the right thing, trying to be a good person, but ultimately lashes out and begins attacking Hal Jordan. And so with the arrival of the good Kyle Rayner, with the arrival of the real Kyle Rayner himself, what we find out is that this false Kyle Rayner is a guy named Alex Nero. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that with regards to the Green Lantern landscape, this is yet another instance of Geoff Johns and Ron Marz grabbing these different eras of the Green Lantern mythos and sort of rolling them all together. And the reason why I say this is because of the fact that back when, Hal Jordan was the Green Lantern, before he became Parallax, Sinestro was always his main villain. Sinestro was Green Lantern's Lex Luthor, so to speak. But when Hal Jordan was basically removed from the DC landscape as the Green Lantern and Kyle Rayner was put in his place, DC needed to give Kyle Rayner his own arch nemesis. Now, of course, this eventually came in the form of Major Force, but Nero was really one of the attempts of DC to give Kyle Rayner his own bad guy, in the sense that Nero was basically given a power ring by the Cordians, those individuals in the antimatter universe who were responsible for giving Sinestro his first power ring. And so the idea was to kind of try to repeat the past, only updating it for the modern day. The issue was that it just didn't really work that great. It worked to a degree, but it didn't really work that great. But again, this was basically an addition that was added in the early 2000s, 2001 or something along those lines. And so the idea was that with Alexander Nero, somebody who was basically suffering from mental disorder, that he would be the perfect nemesis against Kyle Rayner. And this is kind of a cool thing here, because in this battle that we see between Hal Jordan and Kyle, as well as Nero is just basically creating all these yellow constructs, these fear-based constructs. Now again, this is kind of hitting home at the original origin of Nero, but it's also throwing into the idea that the Yellow Lantern Corps is growing in number, that the Yellow Lantern Corps is becoming something to worry about. Now, the Green Lanterns don't know this yet. They don't know that Sinestro is sending rings out across the universe and bolstering the ranks of his Yellow Lantern Corps. All they know is that this guy Nero shows up, and this guy is basically trying to confront people as Kyle Rayner. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that what Nero basically says is he was taken by the Cordians. This whole introduction here, he was taken by the Cordians, and he was basically forced to become Kyle Rayner and basically discredit Kyle Rayner as a Green Lantern, hoping that it would basically create a scenario where Kyle Rayner would ultimately be taken down. Now, of course, this was only one stage of the operation. The second stage was for Nero to be captured and be taken to the Guardians of the Universe. And the reason why this matters is because of the fact that after Nero is defeated by the combined efforts of Kyle Rayner and Hal Jordan, and Nero is taken to the Guardians of the Universe themselves, what we end up finding out here is that where Kyle Rayner says he wants answers, he wants to know what in the world is going on here, what it is that the Guardians of the Universe have been doing, and so on and so forth, we find out that Nero was basically a bomb, that Nero was designed to basically explode with all this Yellow Lantern energy and wipe out the Guardians of the Universe in the process. Now, before that happens, we do get answers in terms of what it is that's going on. And what we find out here is that Kyle Rayner, the whole idea with Nero was not expected. Instead, Kyle Rayner was basically supposed to meet with Mogo, and Mogo was supposed to basically, force him to endure all these different scenarios, meeting Alex and Donna Troy, and all the things that we saw with him facing off against his own fears and his own past, and so on and so forth. And the reason why is because of the fact that this is Geoff Johns and Ron Marz doing something with Kyle Rayner. And this is why I said we'd wait until around the end of the video to cover all this. When Kyle Rayner was introduced as the Green Lantern, as DC began to progress his character, they reintroduced him as the character of Ion, meaning that he had the power of the Green Lantern and he had the power of the Starheart. The problem with this was that there was no real indication of what this meant. Now, of course, we ended up finding out that he had an insane amount of power, and then he used almost all the energy he had to basically recreate the Green Lantern Central Power Battery to resurrect the Guardians of the Universe and to restore the Green Lantern Corps. The reason why this matters is because of the fact that following that, his power was basically moved away from him being a god and back down to normal levels, but he was still being called Ion. And so the question had to be asked, what does that mean? Is that just the name he takes now? I mean, does it have some kind of honorary measure? Because there's no additional power to go with it. So what does it mean that Kyle Rayner is ion. And that was the idea, was to basically consolidate all those different plot threads, bring it together, and it's the Guardians of the Universe basically saying Kyle Rayner is now the torchbearer. Kyle Rayner bears the legacy of the Green Lantern Corps. If for any reason the Green Lantern Corps is totally obliterated, they're totally wiped out, the Guardians of the Universe are killed, the whole 9 yards, Kyle Rayner is the only person who can resurrect them from the dead. He's the only person that can bring them back. And so that's what the term torchbearer means, that he carries the mantle and the legacy of the Green Lantern Corps, and he will restore them if anything ever happens. Now, what this also means is that Kyle Rayner is the most important Green Lantern, because if Kyle Rayner were to be killed, for example, and then the Green Lantern Corps were to be wiped out, there'd be nobody to bring them back. There'd be nobody to resurrect them. They would just sort of be gone forever, and that would really be about it. But what it does from here is it basically throws Kyle Rayner into the fray, and it makes him a central focal point for Sinestro. Because now what it means is that if Kyle Rayner is this important, and if Kyle Rayner is basically the torchbearer for the Green Lanterns, then now it is, let's go get Kyle Rayner. We have to grab him, we have to corrupt him, and swing him to our side. And that's one of the coolest aspects of the whole Sinestro Corps war, is it's like this race for Kyle Rayner. Now, of course, after this information is all dropped by the Guardians of the Universe, Nero begins to detonate. Nero begins to explode and really almost, wipes everybody out. But of course, Kyle Rayner uses this insane amount of power he has by unlocking the full power of the Starheart, as well as all the Green Lantern energy he possesses, and basically confines all the energy of Nero back down again. But again, this really kind of brings Kyle Rayner back to having someone that has an absurd amount of power. And it sets the stage for the idea of Kyle Rayner being one of the sole individuals out there who can resurrect the Green Lantern Corps, a person of such incredible and extreme power that almost nobody can stop him. Again, setting the stage for the idea of Kyle Rayner becoming the White Lantern. But with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.